The other,
Well, so,
anytime.
so Tom, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. My number is always open for you to call, and you can certainly call me anytime you want. I know the last text that was sent said you were going to reach out to me again, and I haven't heard back from you since then. So feel free to certainly reach out.
Okay, we'll set up a time for your group to come meet with us. Sit down and we'll talk
Again,
face
feel
to
free to
face.
reach out and do that at any time that you want.
Cells ring both ways, Brad. Thanks for your comments.
I did. I reached out.
Love to continue to talk to you. Happy to discuss.
Great. Okay.
Thanks for your comment.
Please, yep, please don't keep sharing the misinformation that you have been. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Mayor, if I may, since I had the opportunity to serve on this Future Schools project, I'd like to be able to kind of share my observations from that.
And if you would just give your name for those listening.
Sure. Kevin Payne, 41, Midway. Again, I thank you for this opportunity. And in the interest of time, I've kind of prepared some kind of written comments so we could go through this more quickly. I got involved in the Future Schools project for several reasons. My door-to-door campaign for City Council, which occurred in the fall of 2019, gave me, an opportunity to see and talk to many voters who expressed concerns about the $150 million bond measure, which was on the ballot at the same time. The feedback I received from voters who opposed it were all primarily rooted in wanting less costly solutions to keep property taxes and therefore living expenses in check. Following the bond failure, the district announced that they heard the public and wanted to involve the community in their building and planning process. I wanted to help the district to be successful in this endeavor, as long as it was genuine, completely objective, without hidden agendas, nor preconceived outcomes, and fiscally responsible. Just by way of understanding my perspective and where I come from, my background, my education is in architecture. And my entire career has been in developing real estate, primarily housing and primarily apartments, and primarily affordable apartments. I've been responsible for overseeing the entire development operations of small to medium private companies to large publicly held companies, primarily, again, doing housing, as well as what became the largest affordable housing developer in the West. I've developed over 30,000 apartment units, and in the last 20 years I've done so in the capacity as my own company. I fully understand the design, construction, cost, financing, operating, and maintenance, including dealing with tax-exempt bond financing. And I've spoken at many state and national forums on affordable housing. As I share my observations of this process, my reference to the district is really intended to refer to the superintendent and those who were on the school board in 2019 during the past bond measure. In a word, I'm very disappointed in the Future Schools process. In respecting of time, I will share but just a few examples. I was hoping that the district would be open to cost-efficient solutions versus simply duplicating a second new high school. Our first meeting was held in, if I'm correct, I believe it was November 22nd was our first meeting. And that was primarily just an introduction as to what that process would be and entail. 1 week prior to our second meeting in January, Tom, you were interviewed on KCPW. When asked for an update, you enthusiastically proclaimed that the district was moving forward with the annexation and entitlements for a second new high school on the site in Midway Lane, and that a decision on the bond measure for such would be decided in August. My question is, how can the district claim to be open-minded to alternatives when they are fast-tracking the annexation and entitlements for a second new high school? If the district was truly open to alternatives, as they've claimed, why spend taxpayer money on something that may or may not ever happen? In talking to voters in 2019, the burden of higher property taxes making the cost of living in Wasatch County less affordable was a common theme, and they desired for the district to come up with less costly options. This was borne out in the Future Schools survey, where the #1 priority of respondents was fiscal responsibility, followed closely with transparency. Yet fiscal responsibility was never really discussed nor explored. Since 2019, high property taxes and affordable housing have only gotten worse, way worse. Just today, I'm looking on Zillow to look up the lowest priced home on the market, single-family detached in Heber City. That was $549,000. With 10% down payment, all closing costs also paid with cash, and utilizing HUD's definition of an affordable housing payment, and not even taking into consideration utilities, which they do, would require gross income of $150,000. The second lowest was $625,000. That requires an income of $170,000. The third lowest was $695,000. That requires an income of $189,000. A duplicate second high school increases construction costs and operating and maintenance costs versus just adding on to the existing high school, such as because you have a second stadium, a second auditorium, a second gym, a second cafeteria, and on and on. And these additional operating costs will never go away. They're not a one-time construction cost. They will be there in perpetuity. Value engineering was never discussed, nor explored. I asked a question on that of one of the contractors, and the indication with the answer given was, we've done all the value engineering. Well, value engineering is not limited to selection of materials only. True value engineering involves the whole planning and design process. Nothing was discussed in that regards. After touring the existing facilities, I can now see why some school districts and superintendents in the state of Utah refer to Wasatch High School as the Taj Mahal. It's as if every possible great idea was implemented, but without regard to its costs, both construction and the ongoing operational costs. Just to give a couple examples. Chemistry labs are not shared, but each chemistry classroom has its own dedicated lab. Each dedicated lab basically costs what a new additional classroom would cost, but without increasing student capacity. Same thing with teacher-dedicated classrooms. Same thing with the display rooms versus display cabinets. Those display rooms cost almost like what a classroom costs. And excessive volume, like for example in the library, which increases operational costs for heating and cooling, just to name a few. It was as if the goal of a great education, a good education, were instead a goal of great or good transportation for our students. One can always make a case for better if money is no object. One can always make the case that a brand new Honda is better than a used Honda. Or better yet, that a Lexus is better than a Honda. Or a BMW better than a Lexus. Or even better yet, a Lamborghini better than a BMW. And on and on. However, there are actual real taxpayers who are struggling as we talk right now and meet to make things meet in their own household. and living expenses. There were zero discussions or disclosure of any operational and maintenance cost. Zero. And those are paid for by the voters and taxpayers. For example, just to put some numbers into perspective, operation and maintenance costs of, say, $500,000 annually is like paying the debt service of a $10 million bond, but in perpetuity. It never goes away, and it increases over time. The process seemed more like a PR campaign disguised as community input, more like predetermined outcome of a second new high school in search of a process. Each meeting was more than 80% presentation, education, and I'll call it indoctrination, versus less than 20% of committee input. They seem more interested in capturing pictures of the public participating versus a truly open, frank dialogue of the real issues. Every presentation provided was small school focused and biased. Small school was the code word for a second new high school. That bias was demonstrated by practically almost every comment and response by the superintendent. For example, before I even met Brad, who asked some questions earlier, and we worked together on coming up with an alternative proposal, Brad asked a question of how does the district go about deciding on offering a particular AP course? Like Chinese, I think he threw out. And I think the response was, well, we offer Chinese. And he says, okay, something that you don't offer. How do you know? Paul decided to answer the question and proceed to make a long-winded defensive assurance that students will have the same offering of AP courses at the new high school that they have now. Having not answered his question, Brad proceeded to ask again, rephrased the question to Paul so he could better understand. Paul's response was the same defensive response, that students would have the same choices, and assured him of that. Having completely misunderstood Brad's question twice, I interrupted and pointed out to Paul that I think Brad is simply asking the how, as in, how does the district go about deciding on a particular AP course to offer, versus another AP course? For the third time, Paul gave the same response. And it wasn't until I turned around, and asked basically a teacher behind to answer the question, to which one kindly responded and said, well, we just simply come up with an idea and we try it. To which I said, thank you. You answered my question. I learned very early in my career, dealing with planning commissions, city councils, state agencies, that anyone that has a perfect answer to each and every question or concern of what they're proposing is giving you a salesman pitch. The district claims to have taken a good, hard self-reflection after the 2019 bond failure. Yet the only explanation given by the district as to why it failed is that it was due to a last-minute information campaign by the opposition, that it failed due to its messaging, basically discounting every single valid concern of those who opposed it. It's the reason why this process felt like a PR campaign. Remember, the bond didn't just barely fail. It failed significantly, 57 to 43%. The true why was never explored nor discussed throughout this entire process. And I can guarantee you, it did not fail due to misinformation. The public is not misinformed that over 66% of their taxes, their property taxes, that are increasing every year, goes entirely to schools. They're not misinformed that the cost of living in this valley is becoming unaffordable for far too many, and that promises were made to add wings onto the existing high school for growth. and that there are cost-effective alternatives without sacrificing the quality of our students' education. When any discussion or questions seem to be veering into the second high school on the Midway Lane site, we were quickly told that that is not what this future schools project process is all about. Yet when the final GSBS report came out, what was the result of their report? A recommendation to build a second new high school. And the district is now using this report and process to claim that this is fully supported by the community. We were told that GSBS was running the entire process and meetings. One meeting, I could be wrong, I think it was the second, had approximately, give or take, 10 different participants lined up via Zoom to speak on different issues. Brad just so happened to ask GSBS about this after the meeting. Their response, in terms of who set this up, their response was that they didn't have anything to do with that it was all set up and orchestrated by the district. No real options, just limited options were explored other than add on to the existing wings. No discussion at all as to how we could make the second new high school more cost-effective than our existing high school. There was no attempt at creative options. Had a few of us not come up with an alternative proposal, it would have never been brought up, nor thought of. There also was no final input by the committee members as to which alternatives were the preferred solutions, contrary to your claim, Tom. There was distorting and misrepresenting of certain data and facts from population growth projections and trends to inflate projected student population growth. It would take too long to cover each, but I'd be happy to go over them in detail later should anyone desire. The current high school student capacity was continuously misrepresented. The district's own website still has on it today their arguments for the second new high school for the 2019 bond measure. It claims the capacity of our existing high school is 1,500 to 1,800 students. Tom, in your radio interview just this January, you said the capacity was 1,300 students. The GSBS report says the capacity is actually 2,010 students. That's 4 distinctly different capacities. Construction costs. The district's website for the 2019 bond said the cost of a new high school was 115 to 120 million for 325,000 square feet, excluding 6.2 million in land costs. During our meetings, GSBS presented a current cost of 125 million for that same square footage, 325 square feet, which equals 385 square feet, dollars per square foot. The final GS report that the district is relying upon to make its decisions gave a cost of 125 million for 325,000 square feet. Again, $385 per square foot. My math says increasing costs from 115 to 120 million to 125 million is an increase of 5 to 10 million.
I'm taking notes, Kevin, just so you know.
Okay. Yet prior, during, and after the future schools process, the district claimed and continues to claim that the failure of the 2019 bond is costing taxpayers 45 to 50 million in increased construction costs. The district is now claiming it now cost 160 million. Those numbers that were disclosed were based on 350,000 square feet, not 325. Nevertheless, that's an increase to $457 per foot, a 19% increase. In less than 2 months, my experience is construction costs are coming down. Just look at simple lumber. Over the last 3 months, has dropped 50% of its cost, like $1,200 to $600. Copper, other materials, construction costs are going down. But most importantly, this is being used to bludgeon and blame those who voted on the 2019 bond for costing taxpayers $45 to $50 million. Some of the committee members expressed outright anger and vitriol towards those that voted no as a result of this false claim. And the district let such unfounded attacks go unchallenged. And this continues on social media today. This ugly divisiveness, perpetuated by the district, must stop. Tom, you've recently described opposition to the district's recent decisions as because, quote unquote, we didn't get our way. Nothing could be further from the truth. I told Paul and the district, all of you, that I would support what the majority of the community wanted as their solution, as long as the process was fair, honest, and above the board. This process was none of these. Whether this bias was intentional or not, really ultimately is irrelevant. Either way, it still remains that this process was not genuine nor honest. If there is such overwhelming support for a larger second high school as the district claims, then why is the district so afraid of letting the voters show that support at the polls? Why on earth go through a process when the district was never going to actually consider nor do anything different than repeat the 2019 proposal for a new second high school that's actually larger? And just the final, the argument was made about small schools all along. That the reason for a second high school is small schools are better. And this would be basically the argument of a small school. However, all these studies and reports define a small school as 400 to 900 students, not 1,500, as the district has claimed. So a second high school at a capacity of 2,000 is not a small high school. I wish this process were fair. I wish I would have some type of hope in the actions taken to date for hope that things will change. But I'm completely discouraged by this process.